Jackie, we're ready.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rene Sprattling. I've been a ceramic artist for 50 plus years. I won't tell you the plus part. I was a student at Bella Vista High School years ago. Some of you might know Rick Patel, who was one of the people that started Feats of Clay years ago. Well, he was a high school art teacher at the time. And I had the misfortune, but actually it's a fortune, of hurting my knee in high school on the trampoline, and I had to remove my cartilage. And then later I found out I had no anterior cruciate ligament either. They didn't know that at the time. So it was really tough for me to do PE because my knee kept popping out. So, I was on that track to college where you had no space for extra classes. But now I have an extra space, so I took the art class. And the thing that drove me was that when I was 14, my aunt and uncle came to visit, and I had a good friend that lived in Mountain View. They said, "Oh, we'd like to go visit this good friend." I said, "Okay, we'll take you there." So the whole family drove, and this woman down in her basement had a pottery studio. So she said, "Oh, come on down." She sat down on the wheel and she threw a bowl. And I was hooked from that point on. I knew that's what I wanted to do. So at 16, I was able to get into this class. Dick Cattell was a wonderful art teacher. He was an excellent potter, and he set up, unfortunately, it's not the way it used to be, but he set up a wonderful studio there at the high school with lots of potter's wheels and kilns and everything. I mean, it was just really wonderful. So, that was my first start. And I've just been doing it ever since. I happened to actually, a few years ago, speak with the woman who threw that first pot that I saw. And I think she was probably in her 90s then. She's passed away now, but I had an opportunity to speak with her years later. Thank her for that. Okay, so what we're doing today, as you can see, I throw a lot. And that's mainly what I do is throw on the wheel, but I also do hand building. And I teach throwing and I teach hand building. And today, because I couldn't bring my wheel in here today, we're going to do a hand built piece. And how many of you are ceramic artists? So it sounds like someone's married to one. Oh, quite a few of you. Okay, that's excellent. I also have some little pieces of clay that at the end I'll let you all come up and use them with my stamps just to practice on. So how many of you are wheel throwers?
Wheel throwing.
Wheel throwers, throwing on the potter's wheel.
I have. I'm a hand builder.
But primarily hand builders, okay. Well, I've got it cut out for me today, don't I? All right. Okay, so I have a couple slabs here that I brought. My process for hand building, there's so many different ways to do it. I have, actually there are several of us that got together and made these forms. So these are made just out of insulation. And you take a kind of like a router and cut them out. This is the 1 inch, this is a 2 inch. And these can become your drape molds for your clay. So we're going to drape something today. And then each mold has a set of patterns to go with it. So I've got, I don't know, maybe a dozen or more of those different molds, different sizes. And then these are patterns of different sizes that go with them. So they're all labeled. These are all for the square ones. These are the oblong ones that I brought here. So I'm going to take this side. I'm not actually using these today. I'll show you the other piece I brought to use.
But these have two different sizes, so you can have a size that's exactly the size of the drape, and then once you drape it over, of course, it's going to be a little short, right? Or there's a larger size, which drapes all the way to the edge, pretty much. Okay, so I'm using this. I think I'm going to use this piece. Maybe I'll use this one. I think I can just put that in there. Okay. And I'm going to cut out this piece. And I just brought a few extra things too. I'll pass these around. And you guys can use it. At the end, you can come up and we'll do some texturing on these squares here. So I have all kinds of handmade texture tools. These are natural tools. I'll pass these around that make really interesting textures. You roll them on the clay or press them in. They're really fun. Okay, fettling knife. You all know what a fettling knife is, right?
I don't.
You don't, okay. So a fettling knife is just a tapered knife and it's got a very tapered edge to it. So anytime I use knives in the studio, I run them either on a hard block of clay or something that's going to dull the edge so that nobody gets cut, but it's plenty sharp enough to cut clay, which is pretty soft. And the clay I'm using, so I fire in a home tan gas kiln. So I use a high fire clay. This is Laguna B mix for those of you who are familiar with the Laguna clay. And I really like it because it's sort of a porcelainous stoneware. So you get a little bit of that porcelain look to it, but it's much easier to throw than porcelain. How many of you have used porcelain before? Yeah, so you know, throwing the porcelain.
Very great.
It's very cranky. It's beautiful though. It's like throwing on skin. It just is so soft and creamy, but it doesn't have much tensile strength. So you have to throw really fast to get taller pieces before all the water gets absorbed and it sags. Or you just throw smaller pieces. But when you throw porcelain, you throw it very thin, and if you hold it up to the light, you can see through it. It's really lovely to work with. But I haven't actually worked with porcelain that often. This big bowl here actually is porcelain. You can tell the clay is a little bit whiter than the other clays, and especially if you look on the bottom side, you can see the other white clay is kind of a gray color that it comes out when it gets reduced in the kiln. And the porcelain tends to stay white. So I'm just tracing this piece with my fettling knife. This is a soft slab of clay. You can do hand building with soft slabs or with what we call leather hard slabs. And so leather hard slab, I could pick this piece up. See, this is kind of soft. It would be totally stiff. And then you can join leather hard pieces. So for instance, this box that I made was made out of leather hard pieces because it's really hard to stand up soft slabs and connect them without having them drooping over. So for those kind of things, I tend to use leather hard clay. Okay, so I'm just tracing this out. Because I need bifocals or trifocals, I decided only to wear one pair of glasses. And of course, this is the pair where I can see all of you, but it's a little more difficult to see up close. Okay, so I just had cut this out. I'm taking off the excess clay. And we have an hour. Okay, taking off the excess clay. And now, what I want to do is texture this piece. I'll move this over here. You guys can see a little better. So I have a friend, Lynn Wood, who calls herself the Texture Queen.
And she makes these wonderful mats. You can find her online. So she makes these wonderful rubber mats. Thank you. And I'll pass some of these around. She used to go to Pride Industries and she would have them, she would design these, and then she'd take them and they would make these rubber mats for her. And apparently they're not doing that anymore. I don't know whether Pride Industries closed down or what, but I'll pass them of those around. So I'm going to use these upside down on my clay, and I like to do things just sort of random, you know? So I'll just kind of lay a corner here, maybe I'll lay a corner here, and then have a bunch of other rolling. This is, by the way, this is a flyer for the class I have coming up at Persimmon Gallery. And I left all my cards at home. I'm sorry, but if you go online to Persimmon Gallery on the 2nd of July, I'm teaching a hand building class, which will be very similar to what we're doing here. So I'll take one of these. I like to make my own stamps. I'll pass one of these around. These are made. I'll pass a couple of these around, you can see. So those are made really easily by just taking a ball of clay, rolling it in your hands, and then pressing it. This clay is a little on the dry side, so I'm getting a little cracking along the edge. But basically, you're just going to go around like this to make that little stamp, and you get the edge nice and thin. And you just take your time with it, and then I put a little finger mark in the middle, like this as I'm turning. This is very sloppy, but you get the idea. And then you have a rolling stamp, so you can come with your sponge, and I'm going to use a little bit of this water. Is that a little sacrilegious? And smooth the edges. You can add things to the edges like the one I passed around. I just made a little indent with the pencil and made a little cone, stuck the cone in the hole, and then pressed a little design for that in. So then here you have a stamp. Once you bisque fire this, it's hard, and you can just roll it right across your clay, and you get that trailing effect. You can take your edges and you can curve them like this, so that you actually have a wobbly line when you roll it across your clay. These are really fun. They're really easy to make.
What kind of kiln do you have?
So I have a 10 cubic foot gas kiln.
Oh, gas.
Gas kiln, and I'm in downtown Nevada City. I don't know that today, if I took that kiln out, I don't know that they would let me replace it. But I have a big, kind of a barn-like garage on West Broad Street. It used to be an auto repair shop, and then they repaired the logging trucks in there. So my studio, tall ceilings and really big, beautiful space. But the kilns are in the garage part, so I have a flue going up to protect everybody.
Gas is the best.
Yeah, I love gas. So the thing for those of you who aren't potters, you can fire electric in an electric kiln. You can fire with gas, or you can fire with wood. And I've even heard of people firing with propane. I mean, you can fire with propane. So what's the other one? It's the really volatile stuff. I can't think of it at the moment, but not propane, that's the stuff that they, kerosene. You can fire with kerosene. Not very many people do that. Yeah, not too often. But when you fire in an electric kiln, you get heat, but you don't get flame. So you're basically just heating the pots. And these pots are fired to 2300 degrees, a little over.
when you fire with wood or with gas, you actually get flame going through the kiln, and the flame is whipping around the pots. And some of, like you'll see this picture, has one color of glaze on it. But because of the way the flame hit it, and maybe the pot it was sitting next to, that had a glaze that maybe was volatilizing a bit, so you get different colors. If you fire an electric kiln, you only get one shade, you don't get that variation at all. So I have rolling stamps. I'm going to use a little bit of a rolling stamp here. You often use these when you come up with that doll. I'll pass a couple of these around too. These are really fun. You can purchase these stamps online, which is great. You can make your own. If you're a woodworker, you can make your own position. There's so many tools for potters, and potters love tools, right? All you potters, don't you love tools? They're so much fun. Okay, so I've placed these down here. Now I'm going to take my rolling pin and just roll that design in. So these slabs, I have a slab roller at home. And these slabs are rolled out with the slab roller. Oh, thank you. Ah, get the camera. Okay. You can roll slabs out by hand, of course. I have a couple big rolling pins for doing that, but I usually use my slab roller because it's just so much easier. And I want to make sure I get pretty good impression in there. And once you take your stamp off, can't put it back on again because it's very difficult to get it into exactly the same place. So I like to check over that. That's pretty good. All right. Yeah. So now I've got my piece and I've got a design. I'm going to do a little bit of a rolling thing just across here. Focus up so you all can see. You all see that? It's kind of hard to see the pattern.
Can you show our camera?
Oh, I can show the camera. See that? Yeah, the pattern's a little bit different. See, there you go. Okay. And then I brought, well, I'm going to put this in the form first. So I did the Julia Childs thing, where you have the other one in the oven, maybe. The little handles, we're going to make those in a minute. Okay, so this form, I see this is stiffer, so I can hold this and it'll hold its shape, and I can put feet on the bottom. But you can see the interior of this one. Yeah, yeah. And so I've beveled these edges a little bit, and I've done that for a reason. I could leave them like this, but I think I would like to add some strips of clay on here. All right. So this piece, I would lay either on top of this, and you can see I've made some leaf impressions on this, because often I'll make my pieces laid on top, roll them a little bit, and then this becomes the inside of the pot, right? Once I've laid something over the top, like this, then I flip it over, and that becomes the inside. So you will see those leaf impressions on the inside. But for this piece, the finished piece I have here, semi-finished, I'm going to lay this on top, and then you don't really want to be pressing it in with your fingers. What you want to do is take a dry sponge
because then you don't leave finger impressions. So I just gently lift the edge up and make sure I've got it pretty centered here. And I'm pressing this piece into the form. So now you notice that the edges are curling a little bit when I do this. And I don't really worry if I don't have it exactly centered, because these are handmade pieces. And so you all know wabi-sabi. So wabi-sabi is that tradition that you want to have that human element to it. You don't want to have things perfect. And I used to try to throw my pieces so perfect, and where I'm doing sets, everything exactly identical. And I sort of gave up on that, because you don't want the machine made. You want them to have that human quality. That's what gives them their life, actually, is having that human quality. This I'm going to scoop this over just a little bit. I just said that, and then I scooted it over, all right? Okay, so now these edges, you can actually press the clay back into itself. Just a little bit. And you can form the edges that you want. So then I would let this dry. The thing about forming something inside a slump mold, so clay shrinks when it dries. This clay shrinks about 12%. That's after the total firing process is done, but it shrinks quite a bit just from wet to dry. So it's going to shrink inside this form. I'll be able to lift it off easily, lift it out. If I were to put it over the base of the form upside down, you have to watch it carefully, because if it shrinks too much, it'll start cracking, because this form doesn't shrink. The clay will shrink around. So you have to stay on top of it and be careful. All right. So this is how, so for the edges, this piece was made. More tools. We love tools. Okay, and then I have, here we go. Oh, I'm gonna have this around too. I'm gonna use this first, and then I'll pass it around so you can all see. My students said, "Oh, I made this big mug, and when it came out, it was so small." So I'm just using this edge. So I just have a little roller here, and I'm just gonna roll this edge. This one part I have to trim off probably a little bit, but I'm just rolling it against this piece of wood, which happens to be a ruler, just to thin that edge a little bit. And that's why I brought this. It's really great to work on a banding wheel, especially when you're doing hand building. I guess you would only work on doing hand building. I use banding wheels for when I'm waxing the bottom of my pots. You wax the bottom of your pot so the clay doesn't stick. And it makes it so much faster. I'm just beveling this a bit. Anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me. I remember one year I was living in Texas. I was in my late 20s. You tell me what I was asking what I was doing in Texas, but there I was, and my neighbor saw I had made some pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns. She said, "Oh, we've got a old folks home." I guess we don't call that anymore, do we? Because I'm one of the old folks now. Down the road, and I go there during Halloween, and it would be so nice to take a bunch of these pumpkins and use them as their centerpieces on the table. So I said, "Sure, okay." So I made all these pumpkins, and then I had to paint all the glazes on, because they need to be orange, right? And I didn't have this kind of orange glaze here that I have now. And I was firing in an electric kiln.
So I hand painted each pumpkin and got it into the kiln, and it was taking forever. She came to my room, she said, it's time to go. I said, I'm just unloading. We took all these hot pumpkins down to the retirement center there and put them on the center of the tables. People loved them, they brought them up. But it was so much fun. It was totally different kind of work then that I'm doing now. Okay, so you can see now these edges are beveled. All right, so I'm gonna set this one aside because this one is leather hard, and I want to work with this one now. Okay, so I'll just set it up. So what I'm going to do with this one is to roll out a few thin pieces. Silver. It's always good to be a meat powder. You can maintain your neatness, which is very difficult for me. You're gonna have to work at it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is just cut a few strips of this. And then I'm gonna take this roller here. This roller, this one is straight across, and sometimes when you roll with this, you'll get this edge. But this one is a little beveled actually on both sides of it. So you can roll things out and not leave that edge. So what I'm going to do, this is a little dry, so we're going to add a little water to it. And a little water to all of these. It also helps, these mats, by the way, I don't know if you guys have these, but these are printer's mats. You know, the rubber on the back side. They're basically indestructible, and you can order them used online, and they're wonderful for working on. Sometimes they don't always have the size that you like, but they're really great for working. And it always helps to get them actually a little wet too before you roll things out. Okay, so I'm going to start at one end and I'll roll this. And I'm going to do this a couple times. And I'm just sort of stretching it out as I'm rolling. Flip it over. So clay has a bit of a memory. Even the clay, when I put the clay through my slab roller, the slab roller tends to stretch it out lengthwise and not so much widthwise. So the clay wants to go back into that shape. And so if you let it get leather hard and you build something with it, as it shrinks, it's going to shrink more in one direction than the other direction because it's been stretched more one way. So it's really good to roll, do a little, these have already been rolled the other direction. So I always roll in the opposite direction a bit of the way they came out of the slab roll. Same with rolling this. So I turn it over, roll it the other way. And if I roll this thin enough, you'll see, hopefully, the edges might start cracking. I might have to use a round coil to get that to happen because these edges aren't cracking very much. Okay, so the idea is I'm going to take these and put them down. There's a little bit of a cracking happening here. So I like that kind of, oh yeah, it cracked. I'm going to put a little bit of a pattern on this. So let's see. Round balls. So if you just make some round balls, maybe people use this for painting too, I don't know. I just took a tool and poked a whole bunch of marks in this with a tool. I've got a bunch of these, so you can mark them however you want. These are really fun because you can just roll them around like this on your clay. I don't know if you can see that, but you can get a pattern. Sometimes really interesting patterns just from, you know, sitting at your dining table and making some round balls and poking stuff in them. Okay, so I'm going to use that on here.
This is very thin. Because I'm gonna put 2 layers, and see if this works, on the edge of this ladder that I've made. Just gonna get a random pattern here. Here's our piece. We always like to score our clay. Oh, there's a couple other cool tools. For those of you who sew, these are sewing tools, and they make really neat little sewing patterns on your clay. You know, you can look at those and try those again. So I'm not bring my, okay. Scoring tool. So metal ribs are really useful working with clay. This one has little teeth on it. So I'm just going to score this beveled edge. I don't remember how to stand. When you score, I always score in 3 directions. Because what you're doing is creating a tooth so that clay will stick together. If you only score in one direction, it's not, you don't have enough scoring. Okay, so this is all scored in one direction now. I'm going to go back and score. I use a little bit of water because water actually tends to make a little bit of slip on the edge, although I did bring some slip with me. And I'm going to score the underside of this too. Because I'm going to put 2 layers of edges on here. And we're going to bind those layers together. And the reason I've made them really thin is because I don't want to have a really thick edge here. I'm layering 2 together. And I'm layering them over this clay that's a little bit thicker. I want them to be nice and thin. Did I go all the way around? I think I did. Who's paying attention? Yeah. Any questions from anybody? No.
Does anybody want to come up closer?
You're welcome to come up and take a look here. I'm going to put my tools out here, and at the end, you can all come up and try the different ones and practice making marks, as we say. We love to make marks. Okay, I think this is good. All right, now I have some slip. Slip is just thin down clay, and I usually put this in the blender. A little bit of clay, put a little bit of water, and blend it up. And so it's a pretty thin. Actually, it's not that thin. When you make slip, if you put it in a blender, the way to tell if it's ready is that if you tip it and it kind of holds its shape, then you know it's good. If you tip it and it starts to pour out, it's a little too thick. So I'm just gonna, and I'm not gonna wipe this because if I wipe it, it's gonna take all my scoring off. So I'm just gonna dab this. We'll see, maybe I'll only do part of it because I don't know how's our time doing it.
About half an hour. You can go longer, but people might start trickling out.
I don't mind if you need to trickle out, it's totally fine. you know, when I get in my studio, I'm sure this is true for all of you, no matter what your art is, you kind of get in a zone. And stuff just seems to happen when you're in that zone. Now, these are so thin, I'm not going to score these. If these were thicker pieces, I might score them. And I don't care that the edge, that's fine. I want to have a little bit of here. I have to find where that overlap is and put a little slit there.
It's your own clay.
I mix the reclaimed clay. So I've had 2 shoulder surgeries. They're not really from, although part of it might be from growing for so many years. I had a bad accident where I fell into the footboard of the bed, like this, and it hit me right here in the shoulders and through my, severely dislocated my shoulder. And my arm was paralyzed for 6 months, and then it finally started to come back. The only thing I could like move the very tip of my finger like that, and that was it. It was a little scary being a potter.
But it's a miracle that you can move around.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've had 8 surgeries. I'm the bionic. I have a knee replacement, hip replacement. I had to have my knee replaced because of that accident I had in high school. Finally, when I was in my 60s, I thought, okay, I'm getting a new knee. And of course, my hip was bad because I had went all those years with a bad knee. And it changed my life because I wasn't able to do sports. And now I'm on a master's track and field team. I throw the hammer. So I throw lots of things. I throw the hammer and the discus. And I threw the javelin for a while, but I wasn't very good with the javelin. Kind of giving that a rest. Yeah, so my whole life changed when I had my parts replaced. So if any of you are thinking of getting any parts replaced and you're hesitant, it's miraculous, I can tell you. Really miraculous.
They improved it.
Yes, they've improved it. And I can run now, and my doctor told me, you know, I go back every few years for a checkup. When I first had this knee put in, he said, oh, you know, they're good for about 17 years. Last time I went back, and this was 2010, 2011, when I had this done, he said, oh, you probably have another 20 years left on that knee. He says, we're finding they just last forever, and the plastic pieces that they can replace inside, he says, they're lasting forever, so we rarely replace those. And I said, good. And I didn't tell him I'd been running. I've been running for a long time, so yeah. My husband just had his knee replaced, and he's back running now too. It's really, really amazing. Everybody I know of my age is getting their knees replaced or their hips replaced. Okay, so let's do, I'm going to do a different pattern on this one. I have, oh, this is a really cool thing too. I should show you on the other piece. So I made these on the potter's wheel. It's just a little swirl. And I made this one the opposite, concave convex swirl. And we're going to use those in just a minute. I'll show you on this piece. But for now, I just made this little rolling thing, and I'm going to kind of roll it, not straight, but just sort of different angles here. You guys getting really bored? Is this interesting?
Interesting.
You never know. You know, when you're in your studio working on it, you're having such a wonderful time. All right. So. I might just leave that gap, although I'm putting a piece on the bottom, so let's see how it's going on. Now I can use this. Well, actually, I'm going to use my sponge first, my dry sponge. Just press that in. I have to let this dry really slowly now because I put a little bit more wet clay on top of some other hard clay. And so that wet clay will shrink a little more, and I have to let everything dry really slowly so it doesn't crack away. Every once in a while it'll crack in the firing too.
How do you make sure there's no air bubbles in what you just added?
Well, rolling it for one thing takes that out, and pressing it with the sponge also helps to take it out. And there may be little gaps in between. The camera here. And the air can escape with those gaps. You can actually fire pieces that have air in them. It's just a matter of firing them very slowly.
You don't have a kiln gun,
I do have a little kiln gun. Yeah, everybody's got one of those on their gas kilns, right?
you gotta have a kiln.
Yeah. That helps. Any of you been to Japan? Have any of you been to Japan?
Not yet.
Yes.
No, not yet. Yes, you've been? Have you been to any of their ceramics areas? Kyoto, I think, is a big ceramics town.
I didn't get to do that.
I forgot is that I have to do all of this piece. Because these are going together. Yeah, they have, you know, it's a lot like, I mean, I've been to Mexico and they do this in Mexico too. The villages that each village will have its own art form. So there's a village that does pottery and they do their own style of pottery, the whole village. Very unlike here in the United States where everybody kind of does their own thing. And we like to be individuals. You know, we don't really like that community thing where everyone works together in the same style. But it's really wonderful to see that. I was able to go to Mexico years ago when our son was still in high school. We took a trip down to Oaxaca, stayed in one of the villages up there. And these two, actually, they weren't sisters, they were cousins. They wore these beautiful dresses when they were doing their pottery. They'd go out and dig the clay. They'd have these beautiful, like velvet, almost dresses on, bright colors. They never got dirty. I don't know how they did it. But we'd go out and dig the clay, and then they'd package it. Of course, when you dig clay, there's a lot of stuff in the clay, you know. There's rocks and, you know, big pieces, and you've got to filter it down. So they would dig this clay, and then they had this system. It was right next to where their studio was. They had these huge pots. And so one pot would pour into the next, and pour into the next, and pour into the next. And finally, the bottom pot was the one that had the silty clay, which then got dried and became the clay that they worked with. It was really fascinating.
Wow.
And they would fire. So they live in like a compound, you know, there's a wall on the street, there's a big wall in front, so you can't see anybody's places, but you walk inside and here's several buildings, and here's the covered area where they're, you know, making the tortillas, and they're grinding the corn and making them fresh. They're delicious. And in the very center of all that is where they would fire their pots. So they would, now these were earthenware pots, so they're very low fired, and they're reddish in color, because earthenware has a lot of organic matter in it. And they would pile these pots up. They put leaves and some, you know, burning material in the bottom, pile the pots up, pile more stuff on, pile more leaves on, and then cover it with these big sheets of like corrugated metal. And they would fire, and we'd be standing there, there'd be these huge flames coming out the top. You know, it was like from me to where that blue bucket is. It was amazing. It was amazing. I mean, these pieces would come out, some of them wouldn't make it. Some of them would come out with that, what I love is that black smoky texture to them. And they didn't like that at all. They had that black smoky note. They rejected those. They wanted the ones that were clean with no extra marks on them. That was really, really fun and really fascinating to see how they worked. Seems the flavor. So you guys get the idea here. Couple more of these. And then we'll be done. And then, I don't mind showing how something is made. So, if you're making something that has seams, I like to leave the seams in so people can see, oh, this is where this piece was joined together. Or this is how this was formed. I think it's a little more fascinating for people. Tells more of a story.
Is it true that Nevada City has 98% artists living there?
98% what?
98% artists living.
So actually, a friend of mine did some research. Nevada City has the highest number, or Nevada County actually, has the highest number of artists per capita than any county in the nation. But that's, that's 2D, 3D artists, that's musicians, that's actors, that's all kinds of artists. Yeah, it is pretty amazing. And they're all hidden in the woods, pretty much, except for the musicians. They play. They're out there playing a lot. Yeah. Uh-huh. When I first moved to Nevada City, I was looking for like a potter's guild, and they actually had one, but it didn't last for very long. And I don't know what it is about the potters. I guess we're all just too individual and independent. We don't like to form groups for some reason. So you guys are actually lucky that you've got this group that's going. How often do you meet?
Once a month.
Once a month? Yeah.
And then
Still have the, Lawrence farming town.
Okay, so the story about John Woolman, I first came to Nevada City because I was living in Auburn and had just moved here with my first husband. That was very short-lived, about a year. And I was looking for a job, something to do, and there was an ad in the paper that they were looking for a ceramics teacher. So I answered this ad and called this person on the phone, and he said, okay, come to this location and meet me. He asked what my qualifications were, and I was pretty young. I was, in my late 20s then. And so I went and met this person. It turned out to be Dick Hotchkiss. How many of you know Dick Hotchkiss? Yeah. Dick Hotchkiss, who's now I think he's 84 now. He and a bunch of friends, maybe, I think it's 42 years ago now, they built a 7-chamber Nabori-gama climbing kiln. Nabori-gama means multiple chamber. Anagama is a 1-chamber wood burning kiln. They're Japanese. The Japanese originated it. And this group of hippies back then wanted to build a Nabori-gama. So it's 7 chambers. And it's on a hillside like this. And the chambers are like this, down the hill. Down at the very bottom of the hill is the firebox. So at the very front of the kiln, you load all the wood in. And there's another small chamber here, you load more wood and the pots that you want to get all crusty with ash glaze and everything. Each one of those chambers holds 200 pots. So it's huge. Actually, I think it's only 6 chambers, not 7. And at the very end, at the top of the hill, there's a big flue. So it all goes out the flue at the end. So you start early in the morning or
late at night, and you start firing that up. And as each chamber gets hot, the sides, every chamber on the side has a little porthole that you open with a stick. You pull that out and you shove wood in, and then you stick that back in again. So you've got people on both sides at each portal waiting, and there's somebody calling out saying, okay, stoke. Everybody opens their portal, stokes at the same time, and the whole thing gets up to cone 10, which is pretty hot. It's about 2,300 degrees. That has been going for 40 years. And there was that fire out at the John Woolman School. And the Quakers who owned that property sold it. And the group that bought it, I'm not sure they're, I don't really know who it was or what their background was or anything, but since the fire, they have decided to sell. Well, it looks like the niece and I are going to try to purchase that property. I think it's already in process. And so our hope is that they will be sensitive to this kiln being there. And it's so historical. And we think it's the very first Nabori-Gama kiln that was ever built in the United States. So we're really hoping that they'll be sensitive to that and let us keep the kiln going. We were firing it twice a year with Dick's guidance. Then it came down to sort of once a year as people got busy and it got a little more difficult for Dick too, I think, to keep that schedule up. But he teaches a class there every year, and that class is responsible for loading the chamber. And other people in the community are invited to come. You have to pay a fee, and you come and bring your pots and use the glazes that are there and are part of the firing. And then, so the class loads the kiln. Everybody comes on the last day when it's all cool, and we unload it one chamber at a time by one person here passing the pots down. There might be, 40 people there standing in line, and everybody gets a chance to look at all the pots as they're coming out of the kiln. That's really pretty cool. Do I have anything here that was, I don't think I have anything here that was fired in that kiln. Okay.
I did it 2 times.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
I'm so exhausted.
But it's so amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite the experience. Okay, so here's the finished piece. Well, finished in construction pretty much. I won't take the time to put the feet on, but I will show you how I made the feet. So I've actually I made a couple handles that have a little texture on them. See those? So those will go somewhere. I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to put those on somehow. I might change the look of them a little bit. And then I made these for feet for the bottom. So they will sit just like this on the bottom, or I might tip them a little bit. And I'll put 4 of them, one in each corner, so that this actually sits up a little bit. It's a little elevated from the table, because I like it. They feel heavy to me when they're sitting flat on a table, and which is appropriate for some things, but I really like to lift the piece up a little bit, give it a little air. So I'll do a quick demo on how I made those handles.
When you fire that with those feet, do you fire that upside down, or do you fire it sitting on its feet?
Oh, I'll fire it sitting on its feet, because well, not so much in the disc kiln, but in the high fire kiln, the glaze will settle a little bit. I mean, the clay. So it doesn't quite melt, but it does kind of settle a bit. So if I put it this way up, then I know it's going to be level when I take it out.
It doesn't crack those curly pieces.
No, because when they're bisque fired, they're going to be firm. And the weight shouldn't crack those either. No.
And when you disc fire, you do the same thing, you set it on its feet.
Yeah. Mhm. So I'll do something
What
like
color
this.
is this fire?
So I bisque fire to 04. It's typical 04 to 06, but I find that so I have 4 of mine here like this. So I find that my students tend to dip a little too long in the glaze buckets. So, what happens is that the clay is porous and it'll soak up more glaze the longer you dip it. And of course, then it runs off the top and sticks to the kiln shells. Anyway, you get the idea for these. Okay. And then I would put this, I have some more of these rubber things, and I would put this elevated so it's not sitting on this edge when I put those on.
Are your feet, are they leather hard or are they soft?
These are soft. I can pass these around. You guys can feel these. They're well, they're not leather hard, but if you try and open them up, they might crack. And these are really fun to make, and they're pretty easy. Oh, I'm missing you, Julia.
You actually pass it to.
Oh, there we go. I happen to get. You know, I probably not have to do 2 hours worth of stuff, but where are my blocks?
Is the boundary walls? Like on complex?
It's
The boundary.
the foundry in downtown Nevada City? Oh, no,
It's open again, yeah.
it's open, yeah. Yeah, they're doing shows and there's a gallery there that they've opened and. Oh, thank you.
And the national, they redid to the period.
Yes, the National is beautiful. Have you guys seen the National?
It's been,
You know, it was bought several years ago. By. A corporation, but it's not like a huge, they're the same ones that redid the Holbrook Hotel. They put. The biggest estimate I heard was that they put 18 million into it. And it's beautiful. They've really done a nice job.
and we just get a good price. If you're in the county to stay.
Oh, they give you a discount if you're in the, oh, I didn't know that. I actually stayed there on my anniversary when they first opened.
Oh, it's so adorable.
Let's see, I'll move this down here too, so you can see. Okay, so this is pretty quick. Then I'm gonna let you all come up and play with these guys if you want. Nope, it's not too dry. All right, so I'm just gonna roll out a little bit of a log. Take my fettling knife. And cut the ends off. Okay, and then I'm going to cut this in half. Okay, and then I'm going to roll this so it's more tapered at one end. Viewing audience first. You can see that. So you can see how this is tapered at one end. Okay. I didn't vote that way. How many of you are oil painters? Any oil painters here? Yeah, my mom was an oil painter. I can't paint to save my life. I can't draw. 3D is fine for me, but give me 2D and I am super challenged. All right, so I just happened, I took this wonderful workshop down in San Miguel de Allende in January. It's with another potter who's been potting for about 50 years. And he has these blocks that he makes. So I set this on the edge, and then I put an A and a B because when you turn these different ways, it makes different patterns. That's just so I don't get confused. So I'm going to take this block and lay it against this, what's going to become a handle at an edge. It's about a 45-degree angle, press it in. Okay, and so then I get this shape. Now I'm going to turn it around, turn my block around, and do it on the other side.
So this is what I have. Okay. Now. Put this, so this is that, thick foam. I think I had a really big piece of this that I threw away last night. I wish I hadn't done it. Okay, so I'm just gonna get my finger wet. And I'm just pressing on the foam. And curling that up. And there you have a foot. Do one more here. Really.
A lot of open studios in Sunnyvale,
I'm sorry, what was the,
are there a lot of open studios in Sunnyvale?
I didn't go to any open, there's lots of galleries in San Miguel. And this particular studio, this gal who was actually, I think, from France originally, bought, it's actually a studio building. It was going to be a house, and it was right next to her house. And so she bought the building and set it up as a wonderful studio. Trying to think of the name of not Palermo. Something like Palermo, I have to think it. If you're interested, I can get you the information. They do all kinds of workshops there, not just play. But they do, but well, actually I take that back. It is mostly play. It's not all field drawing, some of it is sculpture. And you can make handles for mugs this way. I made these handles that are both, they're the same size at each end. So that's a lot of fun. Okay. I think that's going to be it for the demo part. So I want you guys to come up. I have rolling stamps here. I have all kinds of stamps here. And if you want to come up and try on any of these squares, try using any of them, you are welcome to do that. This actually rolls on here. You can roll it. This is the wrong size for this, but you can roll it with the handle up. And some of them are patterns like this one. If you roll it, you get an ocean wave. It's very cool. So you can just come up and try any of these, and I've got some more clay over here. So come on up and help yourself. Little stamps.
I have a question about your class.
Yes.
It's the 3 hours and then.
Yes.
Then when do you get it glazed?
So it's usually about 3 weeks from the time your piece is finished, the class till it dries, gets disfired. I put a clear glaze on it, and then, okay. I may do something different with this class, because the last class we used stencils. And so when we use stencils, you have to do a clear glaze over them or they don't show up. So we use stencils in the last, and actually the birdhouse. So this is a birdhouse. We had a birdhouse class last this last week. And these have envelopes on them. So they're colored slips. Pardon me? Oh, no. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah. So beautiful. So these were fun. And these have, if you want to see the stencils, that's a stencil on the side. And that's a stencil. You can see little white flowers. Yeah. That's a stencil. So
And
you
the
just-
colored slip, do you say?
And the colored slip is underneath. All these are colored slips here. There was a piece here, but it crapped off, so. Yeah, those are really fun, yeah. Thank you.
Maybe good to, in Santa Cruz, yeah, because it's supposed to be international attraction for artists.
Yes.
But it's probably the price is really.
I forget, we got an Airbnb, we shared with another couple, and it wasn't unreasonable, I mean, it'd be pretty much like if you stayed in that city or something.
I wrote that.
Yeah, they have hotels, they have some charming hotels in town that I
And he's,
have to rent.
Archangel Michael on the other side.
Oh, right. When we were there, they actually had a parade for Damien Day. who was the one that, actually defended the town or something back in the 1500s or whatever.
Colonial beauty.
Yeah, and the church there is
These are all.
stunning.
Yeah. These are all indicated, like, oh, I bought in. You did.
Yeah, if you get a chance to go, Julia, I would go. Definitely.
It's 170 miles from the airport.
Yeah, you take they have a shuttle, like a shuttle bus that takes you.
I can't get on a bus with chickens and all
No,
that.
no, no, it's not that kind of a shuttle. It's mostly tourists that are on the bus. And
Okay,
it's not that big a bus. It's like 10 people or something.
for two.
It's like an airport
miles.
shuttle. It's fine. It's fine, yeah, yeah.
Typical-
It's about a 3-hour
typical
drive.
services.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Actually, they're awesome.
I
Oh, is it
Well,
really?
you know, if you see some movies about
It's like,
And-
that is cool.
13 and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
There wasn't any of that.
Oh, really?
I mean, we did see a couple of policemen, they do have weapons protection. They
Uh-huh. Mhm.
automatic, so it wasn't a big deal. Yeah. It's a very friendly town, very.
Cobblestone, right?
And all wear comfortable
I've got
shoes.
mine.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I heard the
It
restaurant.
probably keeps growing and growing. Okay.
He's like, I give him a chance, because I guess I'm going.
Yeah, go, really, really.
Yeah.
And the best,
And more,
I
they
step
go
out of
on.
the car,
Like,